Imagine a starlet so mysterious, so shrouded in scandal and shadow, that her final whispered confession just days before her death ignited one of Hollywood's darkest and longest-running mysteries. A woman who lived fast, dazzled screens in silent films, yet disappeared into obscurity amid rumors of crime, deception, and heartbreak. This is the haunting tale of Margaret Gibson. Margaret Gibson was not just another actress in the golden dawn of Hollywood. She was a figure who seemed to live a double life, glamorous on the outside but tormented within. Born into a world that demanded perfection and secrecy from its young stars, Gibson's story is one of ambition, scandal, and a chilling, unsolved mystery that continues to grip historians and true crime buffs to this day. To understand Margaret Gibson's story, we must first step back in time to the early 1900s, when Hollywood was still a dusty outpost of possibility. The silent film era was in full swing, and studios churned out pictures with breathtaking speed. It was a time when stars were born overnight, only to be discarded just as quickly. For many young women like Gibson, Hollywood was a dream and a trap. Born on November 29, 1894, in St. Louis, Missouri, Margaret was raised in a middle-class family far removed from the glitz and glamour of California's burgeoning film capital. But the promise of fame and fortune pulled her westward as a young woman, eager to carve her own path on the silver screen. She arrived in Hollywood in the 1910s, just as the motion picture industry was exploding into a global phenomenon. Gibson's early years in Hollywood were a mixture of small roles, extra work, and the kind of struggle common to many aspiring actresses. But she had something special, a striking presence, and a hint of danger that set her apart. She quickly began landing parts in silent films, becoming a familiar face to audiences who craved new stars and fresh faces. Studios took notice, and soon she was under contract, appearing in dozens of films that spanned dramas, comedies, and mysteries. Yet, beneath the glimmering surface of success, Gibson's life was far from idyllic. Hollywood in those days was rife with corruption, backroom deals, and a brutal social hierarchy that preyed on the vulnerabilities of its young actresses. The pressure to conform, to maintain a perfect image, and to navigate the complex and often predatory studio system took a toll on many, including Gibson. In the shadows, rumors swirled whispers of scandals, secret affairs, and dangerous liaisons. Gibson's name became linked to various controversies, painting a picture of a woman who walked a thin line between fame and infamy. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of her story would come decades later, in the form of a deathbed confession that stunned Hollywood and true crime enthusiasts alike. On a quiet day in 1964, in a modest apartment far removed from the spotlight she once commanded, Margaret Gibson reportedly confessed to a crime that had baffled investigators for nearly 40 years. The unsolved murder of William Desmond Taylor, one of Hollywood's most beloved directors. The 1922 killing had shocked the film industry, leading to a scandal that rocked the foundations of early Hollywood, yet no one was ever officially charged. Gibson's alleged admission to involvement in Taylor's murder sent shockwaves through Hollywood's dark underbelly. Was she telling the truth? Was it a last act of guilt or desperation? Or was it a haunting fantasy of a woman who had lived a life shadowed by loss and regret? This confession is still debated today, but what it undeniably did was thrust Margaret Gibson back into the spotlight, not as a glamorous starlet, but as a symbol of Hollywood's darker side, where ambition, secrets, and tragedy often intertwined. As we explore the life and times of Margaret Gibson, we'll uncover the complexities of her career, the struggles that haunted her off-screen, and the mystery that still captivates historians. We'll delve into the glittering yet perilous world of silent films, the price of fame for women in early Hollywood, and the secrets that stars like Gibson carried with them behind closed doors. Her story is not just about an unsolved crime, it's about the human cost of chasing dreams in a world that could be as cruel as it was beautiful. It's about a woman who dared to step into the spotlight and paid a heavy price. So lean in close and prepare to step back into the flickering lights and shadowed alleys of silent-era Hollywood. This is the story of Margaret Gibson, the starlet who vanished behind a veil of secrets, scandal, and silence. Before the bright lights of Hollywood's silent silver screen ever shone on Margaret Gibson, she was a girl shaped by the uncertainties and complexities of early 20th century America. Born Margaret. Early on November 29, 1894, in St. Louis, Missouri, her childhood was marked by the subtle but real tensions of a changing America, where traditional values clashed with the rapid modernization that would soon define the century. Margaret's family life was a mix of middle-class stability and emotional turbulence. Her parents, though loving, struggled to understand the restless energy and fierce ambition that stirred within their daughter. From a young age, Margaret was drawn to performance, whether in local theater productions or school plays, showing a natural charisma and flair for the dramatic that hinted at the star she might become. But her path was far from straightforward. As a young woman in her late teens, Margaret decided to leave Missouri behind and pursue a future in the fledgling world of motion pictures. Hollywood was a far-off land of dreams and opportunities, a place where new stars were born daily and the impossible suddenly seemed within reach. For many young women like her, it promised escape, glamour, and a chance to rewrite their destinies. Margaret's arrival in Hollywood coincided with a period of explosive growth in the film industry. The 1910s saw the rise of major studios, the establishment of Hollywood as the filmmaking capital of the world, and the birth of the star system. It was a time of rapid change, innovation, and also fierce competition. The silver screen was silent, but the drama behind the scenes was anything but. At first, Margaret took on small parts often uncredited, sometimes just as an extra in a variety of films. These roles were stepping stones, each one a chance to prove her talent and dedication. She worked tirelessly, navigating a world where casting decisions were often influenced by looks, connections, and sometimes darker, more troubling factors. But Gibson had something special, a raw charisma and a certain enigmatic quality that made her stand out. Her features were striking, an intense gaze, a voice with a melodic lilt, and a presence that could fill the screen without uttering a single word. These qualities caught the attention of directors and producers looking for fresh faces to bring life to their stories. Over time, Margaret began landing more substantial roles, appearing in dramas, mysteries, and romantic films. Her performances were noted for their emotional depth and intensity, a natural ability to convey complex feelings that resonated with audiences hungry for more than just surface glamour. Yet, her rise was shadowed by the harsh realities of Hollywood's studio system. Actresses were often bound by restrictive contracts, controlled by powerful producers who dictated everything from their roles to their public appearances and personal lives. The pressure to maintain a flawless image was immense, especially for women, who were subjected to intense scrutiny both on and off the set. Margaret's private life was complicated. Rumors circulated about her involvement with various men in the industry, some romantic, some business-related. There were whispers of jealousy, rivalries, and dangerous liaisons, typical of the cutthroat environment that many early Hollywood actresses faced. Despite these challenges, Gibson managed to build a solid career throughout the late 1910s and early 1920s. She was part of dozens of films, some now lost to time, and became a recognizable figure in silent cinema circles. But even as her star rose, so too did the shadows around her life. Hollywood was a city of dreams, but it was also a city of secrets. Behind the glitz were tales of addiction, exploitation, and betrayal. Many stars fell victim to the darker side of fame, and Margaret Gibson was no exception. The pressures, the temptations, and the isolation all took their toll, setting the stage for the tragic turns that would later define her legacy. As the curtain rose on Margaret Gibson's promising career in silent films, the spotlight also illuminated a darker, more dangerous world lurking just beyond the stage. Hollywood in the 1910s and 1920s was a dazzling playground for the rich and famous, but it was also rife with corruption, scandal, and the shadows of crime. For Margaret Gibson, the price of fame soon became heartbreakingly clear. Behind the glamorous facade, Gibson's life was a complex web of professional ambition tangled with personal turmoil. The studio contracts that once seemed like golden tickets became cages of control. She was expected to project an image of perfection, young, beautiful, virtuous, all while navigating an industry that tolerated, and sometimes even encouraged, the exploitation of young women. The very qualities that made her captivating on screen made her vulnerable off it. Rumors swirled around Gibson, fueled by the gossip columns that thrived on the missteps of Hollywood stars. Whispers of secret affairs, jealous rivalries, and under-the-table deals were common, but some stories hinted at something far darker. there were suggestions that Margaret had crossed paths with some of the era's most infamous figures, men whose names would later be linked to Hollywood's most scandalous and violent episodes. One of the most troubling shadows that loomed over her life was her alleged involvement in the 1922 murder of William Desmond Taylor, a beloved film director whose brutal death shook Hollywood to its core. Taylor's murder was one of the earliest unsolved crimes in the film industry, a sensational case that exposed the hidden underbelly of Tinseltown. The mystery surrounding the murder spawned countless theories, and Margaret Gibson's name was whispered among the suspects, a rumor she would reportedly confirm decades later in a deathbed confession. But the scandal was not limited to alleged criminal activity. Gibson's personal relationships were fraught with drama. She was married twice, both marriages marked by tragedy and turmoil that mirrored the chaos of her public life. Her first marriage was to actor and director Charles McGrew in 1913, a union that seemed promising but quickly unraveled under the pressures of their careers and personal demons. The couple faced financial struggles, infidelity, and emotional distance. Their relationship was marred by intense arguments and bitter separations, and they eventually divorced, a scandalous move in an era when divorce was socially stigmatized. Gibson's second marriage was to Harry Snyder, a man whose own struggles with alcoholism and instability only deepened the darkness in her life. This marriage was turbulent, marked by public fights and legal battles. Snyder's erratic behavior and the constant strain of Gibson's demanding career created a volatile mix that ultimately led to their separation. Throughout these personal storms, Gibson battled her own inner demons. She struggled with alcoholism and depression, common yet rarely spoken of afflictions among Hollywood stars. The relentless pressure to maintain a public image of happiness and success weighed heavily on her, often pushing her toward self-destructive behavior. The scandals, rumors, and tragedies surrounding Gibson were compounded by the ruthless nature of Hollywood's studio system. Actresses who fell from grace found themselves blacklisted, their careers destroyed by gossip and scandal. Gibson's once bright star began to fade as she became entangled in controversies and her reputation suffered. Despite the mounting challenges, Gibson continued to work, appearing in films throughout the 1920s. But the roles became fewer, and the quality of her parts diminished. The vibrant young actress who once lit up the screen was now relegated to bit parts and uncredited appearances, her talent overshadowed by the shadows that trailed her. As the silent film era gave way to talkies, many stars struggled to adapt, and Gibson was no exception. Her career stalled, and with it, her prospects dimmed. The Hollywood that had once promised so much was no longer a place of opportunity, but a reminder of lost dreams and broken promises. In this section, we see the tragic trajectory of a woman caught in the relentless machinery of fame and fortune, a machine that could build stars but just as easily break them. Margaret Gibson's life was marked by ambition and talent, but haunted by scandal, addiction, and personal loss. The story of her descent is a cautionary tale about the cost of stardom in an unforgiving world. February 1st, 1922. It began like any other day in Los Angeles, but by nightfall, Hollywood was shaken to its core. William Desmond Taylor, a respected film director with a clean-cut reputation and a long list of Hollywood credits, was found dead in his home, murdered. He had been shot once in the back, execution style. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen valuables, no clear suspects. And yet, within hours, the whispers began. This was no ordinary crime. This was Hollywood's first great scandal. Police were overwhelmed. Reporters swarmed the scene. The public, already obsessed with the lives of their favorite stars, devoured every lurid detail. It was a story with all the makings of a movie murder: mystery, sex, betrayal, and fame. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. And the ripples it sent through the industry would be felt for decades. At the center of the whirlwind was Margaret Gibson. At the time of Taylor's death, Gibson had fallen from the heights of her early stardom. Though she had once worked with Taylor at the height of their careers in films like The Kiss, 1914, where their paths professionally crossed, she was now distant from the spotlight. Yet her name repeatedly came up in hushed tones among insiders. Gibson wasn't publicly connected to the case in 1922, but she had been arrested for vagrancy just a year prior, and there were rumors of her association with blackmailers and underworld figures. Her proximity to the criminal underbelly of early Hollywood gave investigators pause. And though there was no concrete evidence linking her to Taylor's death at the time, she was quietly regarded as a person of interest. And then came the confession. It wasn't until over 40 years later, in 1964, that the most chilling twist in Margaret Gibson's story would surface. By this time, she was no longer the young ingenue with dreams of stardom. She was a recluse, living in a modest home in Hollywood, her name long forgotten by the film world she had once dazzled. Her health was failing, and she was nearing the end of her life. It was on her deathbed, breathless and afraid, that she is said to have made a shocking admission to a neighbor. She had killed William Desmond Taylor. The confession was never formally recorded by police, but multiple sources, including respected Hollywood historians, have reported that Gibson called out for a priest in her final hours and admitted her guilt, sobbing uncontrollably. According to these accounts, she claimed she had been involved with Taylor romantically, and that an argument between them had escalated into violence. If true, the confession raises staggering questions. Was she acting alone? Was it an accident or something more sinister? Had she been blackmailed afterward, silenced by the same Hollywood system that once lifted her up? And why didn't the police follow up? Some say it was too late. The confession came decades after the fact, and the case was considered cold. Others believe the LAPD and the studios had always known more than they let on and had buried the truth to protect their own. But the most likely explanation is perhaps the most haunting of all: that Gibson's confession, true or not, was simply swept away by time. No longer a star, no longer influential, she was dismissed as an aging, forgotten woman grasping at relevance on her deathbed. Her past was too distant. Her name no longer drew headlines. In the eyes of the world, Margaret Gibson had already vanished. And yet, if her confession was genuine, if she did kill William Desmond Taylor, it makes her not just a footnote in Hollywood history, but its most elusive villain. The murder of Taylor remains officially unsolved to this day. Theories abound, from jealous lovers and disgruntled employees to secret affairs involving A-list actresses and cover-ups reaching the highest levels of the film industry. But no one was ever arrested. No charges were filed. And the case, like so many in Hollywood, faded into myth. What makes Margaret Gibson's story so disturbing is not just the possibility that she committed murder, it's that she might have gotten away with it. And that for the rest of her life, she lived with that secret, watching the industry move on without her, watching herself become a ghost in the very town she once ruled. In her final days, she wasn't remembered as a star. She was remembered, if at all, as a woman with a past no one wanted to touch, a relic of a time when the bright lights of Hollywood couldn't quite hide the darkness underneath. By the 1950s, the name Margaret Gibson had all but vanished from public memory. Hollywood had moved on faster, flashier, and more ruthless than ever. The silent era was dead, its stars long buried under the rubble of talkies, Technicolor, and television. For Margaret, the silver screen that had once embraced her was now a cold and distant ghost. She spent her later years in near total obscurity. There were no fan letters anymore, no offers for screen tests, no studio contracts. There wasn't even much talk about her among old film buffs, not in the way other silent stars like Mary Pickford or Gloria Swanson were occasionally remembered with reverence. Margaret Gibson had become a footnote, a curiosity. And to those few who did remember her name, it was usually in the same breath as scandal, mystery, and crime. She lived modestly, reportedly under different names over the years. Sometimes as Patricia Palmer, a moniker she had used in her youth, and other times reverting to her birth name. Her exact living conditions remain murky, but accounts suggest she led a lonely life, occasionally visited by neighbors, but never by family or old friends from the industry. She had no children, no known partner in her final decades, and no fortune left to her name. But she did have one thing: a secret. Whether she killed William Desmond Taylor or not, that secret loomed large in the minds of those who believe her deathbed confession was real. Imagine carrying the weight of that for over 40 years. Imagine seeing his face on the news, hearing whispers in Hollywood cafes, watching as the world speculated about who had done it, while knowing the answer every time you looked in the mirror. If her confession was a lie, it was a strange and cruel one. And why make such a claim as you prepare to die? But if it was the truth, then Margaret Gibson lived her entire adult life in the shadow of one of the most notorious crimes in Hollywood history, unpunished, unacknowledged, and unbearably alone. In October of 1964, Margaret fell gravely ill. She reportedly suffered a series of heart-related complications, and as her condition worsened, she asked for a priest. What happened next has become Hollywood legend. In her final moments, racked with emotion and barely able to speak, she made what is now remembered as a deathbed confession that she had been the one to kill William Desmond Taylor. No formal record of this confession exists, but a neighbor later relayed the story, and it gained traction among true crime historians and classic film sleuths. Some believed it immediately. Others dismissed it as fantasy, the product of an aging woman desperate to matter again. But many believe Margaret Gibson had finally told the truth. And then she was gone. Margaret Gibson died on October 21st, 1964, in total obscurity. There was no funeral attended by the Hollywood elite, no tribute in Variety, no resurgence of her films. Her name didn't trend, and her story wasn't revisited by a nostalgic press. She was buried quietly, without fanfare, and with only a handful of people even aware of her passing. But her ghost never quite left. Today, Margaret Gibson lives on in the whispered corners of old Hollywood lore, the kind of story that floats between the shelves of true crime books and the flickering frames of silent film retrospectives. She's become something of a myth, a symbol of the dark side of stardom, how quickly you can rise, how devastatingly you can fall, and how a single moment one night, one bullet can unravel everything. Whether you believe her confession or not, Margaret's story forces us to look at the shadows behind the glitz, at the human beings discarded by the Hollywood dream factory once their use was up. She wasn't the first, and she certainly wouldn't be the last. In a time when women in the industry were disposable, controlled, and easily branded as troublemakers, or worse, Margaret Gibson was a casualty of both her own decisions and the machinery of a system that left no room for imperfection. She had talent, beauty, ambition, and secrets. She lived fast, skirted danger, danced with crime, and died with mystery wrapped around her like a veil. Margaret Gibson may not be the most famous name of the silent era, but her story, scandalous, tragic, unforgettable, is one of the most haunting. And maybe that's what she wanted all along. She was once a rising star, a woman whose name lit up the silver screen during Hollywood's silent era. But in the end, Margaret Gibson became something far more haunting, a whispered rumor, a forgotten face, and perhaps a killer hiding in plain sight. Her story is a chilling reminder of what lies behind the curtain of fame. Ambition, betrayal, scandal, and secrets buried so deep, they take a lifetime to surface if they ever do. Whether she murdered William Desmond Taylor or merely carried the weight of knowing who did, we may never know. But what we do know is that Margaret Gibson's life wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning. Hollywood is quick to make stars and quicker still to destroy them. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the twisted, forgotten life of Margaret Gibson. If you were captivated by her story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking tales from the golden age of scandal. And if you think you know what really happened that night in 1922, tell us in the comments. We're listening. Until next time, keep your lights low, your eyes open. And never forget, in Hollywood, the truth is always stranger than fiction.